around here. You'll come around here. Leading me higher. Leading me higher. Leading me higher. Leading me higher.
Okay, hi everyone. I wanted to sit down with you and talk about the spawn, mainly for smallmouth, and what I think about or what I go through when I find a fish, where I fish, where I look for fish, you know, kind of break down the spawn a little bit. Over the last few weeks here in Michigan, since around the end of May, fish have been spawning from central Michigan to northern Michigan, and we've been chasing those big males on beds and then around those areas, chasing those big females. And I just kind of wanted to give you a breakdown of what I'm looking for and what I go through. So I guess to start out with, you know, one of the most important things that I think about is water clarity to find where the areas are that these fish will spawn. Regardless of water clarity, I'll find smallmouth that'll spawn in extremely shallow water, shallower than you would think, you know, a foot deep, especially if they have the right bottom content. And then also in ultra clear water, because of that light penetration, they can spawn clear out to 15, 18 feet of water, depending on, you know, if they have the correct bottom content. What they're looking for really is pencil reeds, the bottoms around pencil reeds that give them some type of cover. I think mainly why they're spawning in the areas they're spawning is it gives their fry some place to go when the spawn is, you know, when the eggs hatch. The second thing that I look for is gravel or gravel bottoms. I tend to shy away from big rock or bigger boulders. It doesn't have as much gravel, but sometimes you'll find areas where bigger rock and gravel mix. For the most part, gravel is the second thing I look for. The last thing I would look for is shells or shell beds. They also have a good bottom content, but a lot of times shells will be in and around sand or clay, and that isn't as good. But if they do have that short grass and there is a good live bottom, smallmouth will spawn in shells. I know they do a lot on our inland lakes in Michigan here. So, you know, that being said, once you've kind of got an idea of where you're going to look for these smallmouth, then you kind of want to know, you know, basically we just use our eyes to find them for the most part. There are some secrets that pros have, or, you know, guys that are in the know have, and I'm not going to really divulge on that today. But for the most part, it's looking for those fish. You know, just a good quality pair of polarized glasses, a good hood, you know, on your shirt, a good dark bill on your cap, and cover some water. Get the sun at your back and cover a lot of water. If you know where those gravel and shell areas are, then you kind of lay eyes on them. Sometimes, depending on the bottom content, the beds will show up tan or blue or, you know, kind of aqua color. Sometimes they show up black. You're just kind of looking for a difference in the bottom, and then you're kind of going to get on the downwind side of those areas and then look for that fish leaving the bed, that male leaving the bed, or in that area of the bed. Once you have found a fish, what I like to try to do is I use spot lock a lot. I use power poles a lot, but I like to try to get where the sun's at my back so I can see the fish good. And then I watch how that fish exits the bed. Something I was taught a long time ago in bed fishing is you always leave the fish out. Sometimes it's being on the shallow side of the bed, but I like to watch how that fish likes to leave the bed when it leaves the bed, because sometimes it'll drop into deep water, it'll go into grass, sometimes it wants to come out a certain direction, and I don't want to block that route from the fish. He'll have less of a tendency to come back to the bed if you block that route in and out of his bed. So once you found that fish and you kind of, as so to speak, take his temperature, you see how aggressive he is to want to be locked on the bed, then you can kind of work on that fish as far as how to catch him. Something that I look for is, depending on what he's protecting his eggs from, you know, if it happens to be gobies, if it happens to be crayfish, something on the bottom bouncing baits tend to work better. If he's protecting his bed from rock bass, bluegills, things like that, then I think a drop shot with a larger size bait works better. But every fish is going to be different, and in this situation, I'm going to have a lot of rods on my deck. So, and that's how I'm going to take this fish's temperature and understand how he's going to react to every bait. I'm going to have, generally I will start out with, say classic bait as a tube. This tour tube by Big Bite's a great tube, very salty. When he gets a hold of it, it's got a lot of salt in it and he won't let it go. Strike King coffee tubes, they also make a great tube. Another bait that's a bottom hugging bait that's been popular in the last few years is a Ned rig. And this is the Midwest Finesse head and the standard Z-Man, Ned bait that's on the back. And it's a fantastic small light wire owner hook. It's got a good wire keeper to it. I'm pairing this up with 8-pound line, 8-pound fluorocarbon, about a 20+ foot leader, and on 10-pound braided line. I throw that on a medium heavy. Sometimes in really ultra clear situations, you have to go down to 6-pound on everything, but I try to stay with as heavy as I can get away with, depending on the water clarity. The next bait I want to talk about is going to the drop shot. So if I'm throwing a drop shot for those bedded fish, I'm gonna a couple quick tips on a drop shot. And the other thing with all of these baits is you want to keep an open mind with colors. A lot of times you'll throw very natural colors. Sometimes I throw very bright colors, bright chartreuse, yellows, pinks, and then sometimes really natural colors. Every fish is going to read differently, and he's going to react differently to different colors. So let's talking about the drop shot. I use a little bit heavier of a weight when I'm fishing a drop shot on a bed, and I don't want to go any. That's about 7-8 inches right there. That's a little long, but 6 to 8 inches is about what you want. A fairly short leader on your drop shot. Another thing you'll notice on my drop shot is I always use an exposed hook on my drop shot. You're not fishing around snags, and I thread the hook on this. This is a Gamakatsu light worm hook. I love this hook. 6-pound fluorocarbon, and I thread the bait up on the hook. So I have a real nice exposed hook, plus the hook is actually farther back in the bait. And I like to use, this is a 4.5-inch size Dream Shot. I like this bait, the full size Smallie Smasher by Big Bite. That's a great bait, but I like a larger profile bait. I think in their protecting the bed, I like a little bit larger bait when they're protecting the bed. I think it works better for me. It creates more of an aggressive response from the fish. The next bait I want to talk about is the fly, and I usually keep a Ned, a tube. There's 2 rods there, and then 2 different drop shots, rigged the same but with different baits on them. And then the same thing with the fly. So I'm tying. This is a hand tied marabou fly. And I'm using a 6-pound leader to a 10-pound, and I'm using a little bit longer rod on this, a 7.5 foot rod. The other 2 I'm using a 7-foot rod, just to throw this lightweight fly. But the 2 flies that I'll have, one I'll have an 1/8 of an ounce for those beds that are deeper, 12 foot and deeper. I'll have an 1/8 ounce. If I'm in a lake that doesn't have beds deeper than 12 foot, I'll just tie 2 flies, 2 3/30 seconds flies on in different colors to give them a change up. Maybe like this is an olive and black. Sometimes I'll throw a black and purple, a black and chartreuse. There's a few different colors, and I'll just change it up. And you always want to add some type of what I call it meat on the back of the fly. I see a lot of guys, and when I started throwing these, I did the same thing. Is I would take a piece of a Senko and I would thread it onto the hook of the fly and jam it up on here. But hardly any, if any, of these come with any kind of a keeper on them. So the bait ends up sliding down the hook and balling up, this tiny little light wire hook, balling up on the tip of the hook. So I find that just just threading it on the back instead of fishing it onto the hook, just hanging it off like a jig chunk is better. Then I'm taking a chunk of Senko. This is actually a piece of Kitech. I just take my leftover Kitechs that I have, and I take scissors and I cut chunks off them, long skinny chunks, and then I thread that on the back. One thing you really want to be aware of in these is not all hair jigs or marabou flies are created equal. And I'm going to get into that in more detail, because this bait in my opinion, is the ultimate smallmouth bait. It catches a lot of big females out and around those beds, over and above just the beds that the baits you're going to fish on the beds. And I want to do more videos on this marabou jig. from pre-spawn to post-spawn, because this is a very important bait to guys that are, you should really be in the know on this if you're a serious smallmouth fisherman, a trophy smallmouth fisherman. So, that talking about the fly, there's the two, I'll keep 2 flies on an 1/8 and a 3/32. And then last but not least is love-hate relationship with this bait is a wacky worm. This is the Berkeley General. I like that G7 collar because I can catch a lot of fish on this bait. I'm using 6-pound line on this. Actually, an 8-pound fluorocarbon. And this is a Gamakatsu drop shot, Aaron Martin's drop shot hook. And I use that G7 collar on it. This 4-inch General has probably caught 6-8 fish now. And you can see it's just as good as the day it was when I put it on. It's because of that G7 collar. If you haven't heard of them, it's just a surgical tubing that goes over you with a pair of pliers, but it'll make your wacky worms last tremendously longer, especially on the good ones, which are softer plastics. And that's kind of a last resort bait. Like I said, you have to have a lot of patience to fish that bait, but it's a deadly bait. And sometimes they won't respond to anything else. So there's the baits I throw. I guess the last thing I'd like to say about a spawn, fishing in the spawn, especially for these big old largemouth, you'll see in this video that, when we were fishing, in the northern lower peninsula, we were catching some fish in the upper 5, lower 6-pound range. It has been said that those fish are estimated, that those fish are 20 plus years old. So I really urge you to practice catch and release. I don't even put those fish in my live well. I like to catch them and release them immediately. I understand there's tournaments that are, catch and keep tournaments, and I did it myself for years. I just choose not to. Just be careful with the resource. I have seen lakes go downhill. Really, if we have opening day tournaments year after year on lakes, the weights tend to drop drastically if we keep fishing those lakes year after year. And I really think it's due to keeping fish off of beds when they're already stressed and you're killing a lot of those fish. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm not saying that I'm against tournament fishing during the spawn. I just love bass fishing. I love this resource and I love catching giant smallmouth, and that's why I would urge you to release the large males and the females immediately if possible. Thanks, and hope you like the video.
Oh, what a fish. Good